As we look forward, we have a debt problem because you can't keep adding to debt faster than you add to income without that problem. And that's a big risk. You have a change of 50, 25 basis points and so on. Let's just go back to the basics and the big picture. First of all, let's take the bond yield. The bond yield, roughly speaking, has got to be about what we determine the expected inflation rate will be over the period of time. Of course, there's a question about that. That number, it probably is settling into the vicinity of 3.5%. That's the right number. There has to be above that a real interest rate. In other words, for those who are holding debt assets, they have to receive a return above the inflation rate by something probably in the vicinity of 1.5%, 2%. So that is going to get you in the vicinity of 4.5%, 5% interest rates. And you're seeing the movement around that level. Then there's the big question of the supply demand for bonds. The government produces a certain amount of bonds that are in light and size that is equivalent of roughly the size of the deficit. That means they're going to have to sell a lot of bonds. And then we look at who are the buyers of those bonds and do they have an adequate appetite? And that's a big risk because many who own those bonds have had losses in that. That's not just banks, that is central banks, that is Japanese investors and so on. And so there's a supply-demand issue. You'll have these wiggles around there, but those are the fundamentals that will drive it. So we're seeing the need for the rise in real interest rates so that the creditor gets an adequate return at the same time as we have a supply-demand balance. So that's how it looks to me. What's happening in the economy is that a lot of money was sent out in the form of checks and the like, and went out to a lot of people. And so the household sector did well because the government sector did poorly. They got themselves in deeper debt intentionally so that the household sector and the business sector could be better off. And then there's the rise in interest rates. What happens from that is that savings of money gradually goes down, and also the debt maturities as they roll forward gradually go up and create a squeeze. So there's an emerging squeeze happening. However, because the unemployment rate is relatively low, and because the compensation levels have been relatively high because of that set of circumstances, the household sector's income has been good. So you have a sector in the household sector, hence the economy as a whole, and I'll include the business sector in that, in which by and large the financial transfer of wealth from the government as it got in debt and gave it to the public sector, gave it to the private sector, that allowed that to happen. That is a formula for a gradually weakening economy, not a big break in the economy, a slowing of that economy. I think that's what we're seeing. And as a result of that, that's what you're seeing in the bond market as there's a bit of a easing within that range. As far as the question of where the rates are, most likely, I think the rate structure is going to be staying at its level, perhaps slightly less, but there's a range of uncertainty around that having to do with the supply-demand question. We're now at a period of time where the supply of bonds to be sold will start hitting the market. And now we have to see the demand issues of that, and that'll be around there. I think that probably, I would say somewhere in the vicinity of relatively flat. I don't think there's going to be any important change in the Fed policy other than maybe a slight easing as the economy slows down. I think the thing to realize is that the economy will likely weaken. In other words, its growth rate going to something close to zero, plus or minus, maybe 1%. And with that exerts a slight downward pressure on interest rates. At the same time, the supply issue becomes an important issue. I think we're talking about the short term as very distinct from the longer term. The short term we just talked about. The longer term is that we are at a point in which we are borrowing money to pay debt service. And there is a process by which when you keep having debt growth faster than income growth, then that means that you have debt service encroaching on your spending. That's the same for the government as it is for us. And as that happens, and you want to keep spending at the same level, there is the need to get more and more into debt. And the way that works, it accelerates. We are at the point of that acceleration, which creates the supply-demand problem. And it's made worse by the other issues that we're talking about. The internal political issue, the internal social conflict issue there is something that is affecting foreign demand for bonds. About 40% of our debt is sold to foreigners. And so there is a concern of the American politics, of the controlling of this debt crisis, and these types of things. So we come back to the same basic question. How strong are we going to be? When we talk about strong, what I mean is also economically strong. And economically strong means financially strong. That means it's just a basic thing. Financially strong means, do you earn more than you spend? Do you have a good income statement as a country? Do we have a good income statement? And do we have a good balance sheet? More assets than we have liabilities. The worse that gets, the more we are going to have that long-term problem. And it's just, you can see it in the numbers. It's just a matter of numbers. We are near that inflection point.
Half Americans are skipping summer vacation right now due to financial challenges. 2/3 of Americans are falling behind in their bills. Jobs report came back. Unemployment, the highest it's been since 2021. The average wedding today is $30,000. When I saw that article, I said, there's no way that's the average wedding for a Middle Eastern. That's the average American wedding. You can probably save $170,000 if you marry an American versus a Middle Eastern. This doesn't apply to everybody. People are feeling stuck in their jobs. Bosses are starting to worry. What's this story all about? Companies like McKinsey, Synchrony Financial, and Exact Sciences are implementing strategies such as increased mobility budgets, job swaps, and role expansions to combat feeling of being stuck and provide new experiences for employees. McKinsey's goal is to help staffers gain a more global understanding of the world by working in different cities or countries. Voluntary turnover within companies have decreased from 17% in 2022 to 12% in 2023, leading to fewer internal moves and promotions. This has resulted in lower regrettable turnover and fewer opportunities for career advancement, causing frustrations amongst employees. Companies like Allstate are prioritizing internal recruitment by setting up career-focused conversations and creating tools to see open projects within the company. This strategy aims to fill more roles internally, with Allstate increasing its internal hires from 45% to 60%, showing that the company values employees' career progression. Tom.
This is the unintended consequence of work from home, and let me paint the picture for you. People working from home could not have those dozen conversations with your boss a week that were mentoring opportunities. Hey, look, I got this halfway done. What are your thoughts on that? Can you give me a few pointers to finish this up? All of that is off the table because you're just on a Zoom with your team to get something done. So you've turned yourself into a remote robot, not a member of a team. Now companies are coming back saying, hey, we want to develop the people inside and do internal hires to promote them. But some of these people we don't have good visibility to. Some of these people really haven't developed. And so companies right now, we've seen a lot of layoffs this year, not as much as a year ago and 2 years ago, but layoffs are coming. And what companies want is the best of the best. They're talking about, we need to expose people to the fact that, hey, there's a promotion you could get. Why don't you mentor with me a little more and aim yourself for that promotion? You're a good quality people. Companies want to keep the best, yet the work from home and everything has allowed some of the good people who made the bad choice to stay working from home, didn't get the visibility to the boss. And so now this is unintended consequences coming home to roost.
You know, the whole concept of people feeling stuck in their jobs. Do you know the average amount of jobs someone works in their lifetime? The answer is 12. So 12 different jobs. The average job is about 3 to 5 years. So you're going to plan on working for 50 years. The name of the game is figuring out where you want to be long term. You know, there's a difference between having a job versus having a profession. That's the difference between being a jack of all trades versus being a specialist. I've been at my company in the financial services world for 18 years. Most people don't spend more than 5 years at a job. They go from job to job. They're moving for a better paycheck, a better opportunity. People want a work-life balance. I want the perfect work-life balance. Well, Pat, you talk about this all the time. If you want success in your life, buddy, forget about a work-life balance. You better work. You know, the way that I operate is I like doing the Pareto principle, which is the 80-20 rule. 80% of my life I spend working, reading, strategizing, improving. And then 20%, yeah, I'd like to enjoy life a little bit. But if you want to have success in your life, if you want to find meaning in your life, you got to work your tail off. Last point, you know, they say, should you follow the passion or should you follow the money? Well, neither. Follow what your talent is, what you're good at. If you double down at that, the money will come and you're also going to get passionate about it because you're good. Because they say that competence will turn to confidence. This whole conversation about turnover and regrettable turnover and people feeling stuck. If you follow what you're good at, the rest will fall into place.
My father was the head of education, PhD, all that stuff. I go home and ask him, said, why don't we learn about money in school? And he looked at me and says, because the government doesn't let us teach that subject. The government tells us what we can teach and what we can't teach. And I thought that was strange. And I said, but aren't we going to school to learn about money? He says, no, your job is to get a job. I said, but you get a job to earn money. He goes, no, you're supposed to just get a job. And I went, no. Isn't the purpose of a job to earn money? He goes, you're correct. I said, so why don't I just learn about money? I can skip the job part, you know? And he got flustered and he said, if you want to learn about money, why don't you ask your best friend's father about money? And I said, why? That's Mike. So why ask him? He says, because Mike's father is an entrepreneur. And I said, what are you? He says, I'm an employee. I'm a government employee. And I went, oh, what's the difference? He says, the difference is an entrepreneur must know about money, or they're no longer entrepreneurs. And he says an employee doesn't have to know anything about money, because the government will take care of them, the company will take care of them. So I'm all confused. But I took my dad's advice and I trundled over to Mike's father's office and knocked on his door and I said, hey, I'm here, 9 years old. Teach me about money. He says, beat it, kid, you know. But that's where the story of Rich Dad, Poor Dad started. And finally, through persistence, my rich dad started teaching me about money on one condition. And that condition was he would never pay me. He says, the moment I pay you, you think like an employee. He says, that's the trap. Entrepreneurs work for free. And now I'm 9 years old, my head's going cracking in half. He says, you never want a paycheck. You understand that, kid? I said, okay, I got it. And he says, well, how do I make money? He says, that's what entrepreneurs figure out. It's like, so how do I learn about money? So he would just break out a Monopoly game board. So I would work for free. I'd pick up cigarette butts, and he had hotels and restaurants, and I would clean and do menial tasks. And as I got older, I started getting into office work and marketing and accounting, and I was an apprentice basically, but I always worked for free. And he would teach me about money, but the way he taught me about money was playing Monopoly. And I finally one day I got upset. I said, well, when are you going to teach me about money? He says, what do you think we're doing? We're playing Monopoly. He goes, no. What do you think we're doing? We're playing Monopoly. He says, what do you think we're doing? So I don't know. I'm teaching you about money. And then that's when, you have one green house. He says, there's many formulas for great success in money. There's thousands of them, but one of the best ones is found on the game of Monopoly. It still is today. 4 green houses, 1 red hotel. I said, what? He says, one of the greatest ways to acquire great wealth is playing Monopoly in real life. 4 green houses, 1 red hotel. Well, is that all there is? He goes, that's it. And he says, what do you think I'm doing? And I went, I don't know. So then he took me out and he showed me his greenhouses. And 10 years later, when I was 19, I was now in school in New York, and I come back to Hawaii, and Rich Dad had bought the biggest piece of land smack dab in the middle of Waikiki Beach. And when you go to Waikiki Beach today, you'll see the Hyatt Regency Hotel. That was his hotel.
Just like the game of Monopoly.
Just like the game of Monopoly.
Acquired assets, and they became bigger assets.
He just kept what's called an assemblage, because that property wasn't that big at the time, so he had to buy out all the small guys. Because Waikiki was a little dirt water little town. So he'd buy out this shop owner and buy that shop owner. And it took him a while, but he finally assembled this large piece of property. And then he and Hyatt put up this giant hotel. It just sold for $800 million. So that's how I learned about money.